You lied today. Maybe it was small. Maybe it was something so minor you've already forgotten it happened. Maybe it was bigger, something you're still carrying around in the back of your mind, adjusting, maintaining, making sure the story stays straight. But somewhere between waking up this morning and arriving here, you deceived someone. You said something you knew wasn't entirely true. You left something important out. You let someone believe something you knew was wrong, and you chose not to correct it. And here's the thing. You're not going to feel great about me saying that. Because we are a species that builds entire moral frameworks around the wrongness of lying. We teach children not to lie before we teach them almost anything else. We have commandments about it, codes about it, entire philosophical traditions dedicated to the ethics of honesty. We treat lying as one of the more fundamental violations of the social contract. And yet, here you are. Here we all are. So before we get into the judgment, let's ask the more interesting question. Not whether lying is wrong, but when it started. When did the first human being look at another human being and deliberately, consciously construct a false reality in their mind? When did deception stop being a simple animal reflex and become the sophisticated, calculated, neurologically extraordinary act that you performed this morning without even really thinking about it? The answer involves chimpanzees, a concept called theory of mind, a series of experiments with very young children that will make you genuinely uncomfortable, an argument that might be the most counterintuitive thing you hear this week. The argument that lying didn't evolve to hurt people. It evolved to hold them together. And without it, human civilization as we know it probably doesn't exist. A lie is not just saying something false. That bar is too low. If it were that simple, a parrot that mimics the wrong word would be lying. A broken thermometer would be lying. Saying something false is just an error. Lying is something categorically different and categorically more remarkable. To lie, you have to know the truth. You have to know that the other person doesn't know it or believes something different. You have to consciously choose to create a false belief in their mind. And you have to be able to track two separate versions of reality simultaneously, what is actually true and what you want them to think is true, without confusing them. That is not a simple cognitive operation. That is one of the most demanding things the human brain does. It requires what psychologists call a theory of mind, the ability to model the mental states of other people, to understand that other people have beliefs, desires, and knowledge that are separate from your own. To think not just about the world, but about how the world appears inside someone else's head. And here's why that matters for the origin of lying. Theory of mind is not universal. It is not a given. It is a specific cognitive capability that appears to be rare in the animal kingdom, that develops on a very particular timeline in human children, and that took millions of years of evolution to produce. So when we ask when humans first started lying, we are really asking something deeper. When did our ancestors first develop the cognitive architecture that makes deliberate deception possible at all? Let's talk about the brain for a moment, because the neuroscience here is genuinely extraordinary. When you lie, your brain is doing significantly more work than when you tell the truth. Studies using functional MRI imaging have consistently shown that lying activates more regions of the brain than honest communication. The prefrontal cortex, which handles planning, decision-making, and inhibitory control. The anterior cingulate cortex, which manages conflict between competing impulses. The right hemisphere language areas, which are associated with constructing novel narrative. Lying, neurologically speaking, is a full production. Truth-telling is relatively passive. You retrieve what happened and report it. Lying requires you to suppress the truth, construct an alternative, check that alternative for plausibility, model the listener's likely response, and maintain the false version in working memory while continuing to interact naturally. The fact that we can do all of this so quickly, so smoothly, so automatically that we sometimes don't even register we're doing it, is not evidence that lying is easy. It is evidence that we have been doing it for a very, very long time. Skills that feel effortless are skills that have been deeply practiced, not just by you individually, by the entire human lineage across hundreds of thousands of years. Now, let's talk about animals. Because if you want to understand where human lying came from, you have to understand what deception looks like before it becomes lying. And the animal kingdom turns out to be full of deception, just not the kind that requires a theory of mind. There is a species of firefly in North America called photuries. The females of this species have learned to mimic the mating flash signals of other firefly species. When a male of the other species approaches, attracted by what he thinks is a receptive female of his own kind, the photuries female eats him. This is deception. The firefly is sending a false signal to manipulate another creature's behavior. But the firefly has no idea that the male has a belief she is manipulating. She has no model of his mental state. She is running a hardwired behavioral program. It works, but it is not lying. It is biological trickery. The same principle applies to the orchid that mimics the appearance and scent of a female bee to attract male bees for pollination. The stick insect that looks exactly like a twig. The anglerfish that dangles a bioluminescent lure in the darkness of the deep ocean. These are all deceptive systems. None of them involve anything we would recognize as intentional deception. They are evolutionary solutions, not cognitive choices. Now move up the complexity scale to primates, and things start to get genuinely interesting. Chimpanzees have been observed doing something that looks a great deal more like intentional deception. In studies conducted at primate research centers, chimpanzees who knew the location of hidden food would actively mislead other chimpanzees, approaching different locations, displaying confusion, walking in the wrong direction when a dominant chimp was watching. When the dominant chimp left, they would circle back and retrieve the food. This is more interesting. The chimpanzee appears to be modeling the other chimpanzee's belief about where the food is and deliberately influencing that belief. But researchers are genuinely divided on whether this constitutes a full theory of mind or whether it is a more sophisticated version of the firefly strategy. Learned behavioral associations. I have learned that approaching food when a dominant chimp watches leads to losing the food. I have learned that approaching elsewhere leads to keeping the food. Whether the chimp is actually thinking he believes the food is over there and I want him to keep believing that is exactly the kind of question that keeps primatologists arguing at conferences. What we can say is this: the cognitive precursors to lying, social intelligence, behavioral flexibility, the ability to connect one's own actions to another creature's responses are present in other great apes. We share a common ancestor with chimpanzees from roughly 6 to 7 million years ago. Whatever cognitive seeds make deception possible were likely present in that ancestor and have been developing ever since. In human children, the development of theory of mind follows a remarkably consistent timeline regardless of culture. And the experiment that maps that timeline is one of the most elegant and slightly disturbing things in all of developmental psychology. It is called the false belief task. And here is how it works. You show a young child a scenario. A character named Sally puts a marble in a basket and leaves the room. While Sally is gone, another character moves the marble to a box. Sally comes back. The child is asked, where will Sally look for her marble? Children under the age of approximately 3 to 4 years old consistently answer, the box, because that is where the marble actually is. They cannot yet separate what they know from what Sally knows. They project their own knowledge onto her. Children over the age of 4 begin to answer, the basket, because that is where Sally thinks it is. They have developed the ability to model a belief that is different from reality. They understand that Sally has a false belief. They can track 2 versions of the world simultaneously. This transition, from projecting your own knowledge onto others to understanding that others have independent mental states with independent content, is one of the most significant cognitive developments in human childhood. And it is the exact moment when lying, genuine intentional lying, becomes cognitively possible. before theory of mind develops. Children say false things all the time, but they are not lying in the full sense. They are expressing wishes, confusing imagination with reality, making errors. After theory of mind develops, something changes. Studies have shown that children begin telling intentional lies almost immediately after passing the false belief task. Not because they are suddenly bad, because they can. The cognitive hardware is online, and the social incentives to use it are already well established. Now, here is the question that should be sitting in your mind right now. When in human evolutionary history did this cognitive hardware come online? We cannot scan the brains of our ancestors. We cannot give the false belief task to a Homo erectus. But we can look at the archaeological and behavioral evidence and make some genuinely informed estimates. The prefrontal cortex, the region most heavily involved in the complex cognitive control that lying requires, expanded dramatically in the Homo lineage over the past 2 million years. Homo habilis had a significantly larger brain than the Australopithecines that preceded them. Homo erectus had a significantly larger brain than Homo habilis. And Homo sapiens, appearing around 300,000 years ago, had a prefrontal cortex that was not just larger, but structurally reorganized in ways that supported more complex social cognition, planning, and behavioral regulation than anything that had come before. But brain size alone is not the whole story. Because the capacity for social deception seems to be tied not just to overall intelligence, but to the specific demands of navigating complex social environments. And here is where a remarkable idea called the social brain hypothesis becomes relevant. The social brain hypothesis, developed by anthropologist Robin Dunbar, proposes that the dramatic expansion of the primate brain, and particularly the human brain, was driven primarily not by the need to solve physical problems, how to find food, how to make tools, but by the need to solve social problems, how to manage relationships in a large group, how to track alliances and rivalries, how to navigate the extraordinarily complex web of social information that comes with living in a community of other intelligent, self-interested individuals. The more socially complex your environment, the more cognitively demanding it is to navigate successfully. And the more cognitively demanding it is to navigate, the stronger the selection pressure for bigger, more sophisticated social processing capabilities. In other words, living with other smart, competitive, manipulative humans is itself what made us smarter and more manipulative. A feedback loop that ran for hundreds of thousands of years and produced, among other things, you. Under this framework, the capacity for intentional deception wasn't a byproduct of intelligence. It was one of the drivers of it. The ability to deceive a rival, manipulate an ally, conceal information from a competitor while extracting information from them. These were survival skills in a social environment that rewarded cognitive sophistication. The individuals who could do it more effectively had real advantages in the social competition that determined access to resources, mates, and status. Their genes propagated. The capacity deepened across generations. By the time anatomically modern humans appear in the fossil record, the cognitive architecture for sophisticated social deception was almost certainly fully operational. But here is where the story takes its most interesting turn. Because the question of when we started lying leads directly to a question that most people have never thought to ask. Why do humans lie so much in ways that appear to benefit the people they are lying to? Think about the lies you tell in a single day. How are you? Fine, thanks. Do I look okay in this? You look great. Was dinner good? Really good, yes. These are not lies of malice. They are not calculated strategic deceptions designed to extract advantage at another person's expense. They are social lubricant. They are the small, constant, low-stakes fictions that allow human social interaction to function without constant friction and conflict. Psychologist Robert Feldman at the University of Massachusetts conducted a study in which participants had short 10-minute conversations with strangers and then reviewed video recordings of those conversations. On average, participants told 2 to 3 lies in every 10-minute conversation. And crucially, many of them were not aware they had lied until they watched the recording. The lying was so habitual, so automatic, so woven into normal social interaction that it was essentially invisible to the people doing it. This is not the behavior of a species that added lying to its repertoire reluctantly under extreme pressure. This is the behavior of a species for whom social deception is so deeply integrated into everyday interaction that it operates largely below conscious awareness. And the most common category of these automatic social lies? Lies that made the other person feel better. Lies that smoothed conflict. Lies that maintained relationships. Lies that kept the group cohesive. This matters enormously for the evolutionary story. Because if lying were purely competitive, purely self-serving, purely about extracting advantage at another's expense, it would corrode social trust so rapidly that it would destroy the group cohesion it requires to function. A community where every individual is constantly deceiving every other individual for personal gain is not a community. It is a collection of isolated, mutually suspicious individuals, which is one of the least survivable configurations a social animal can find itself in. But lying in human societies has never been purely competitive. It has always been a mixed strategy. Deception in service of the self coexists with deception in service of the group. And the social lies, the diplomatic fictions, the tactful omissions, the kind words that aren't entirely true, these appear to serve a genuinely social function. They protect relationships. They maintain face. They allow individuals to interact cooperatively without the constant threat of brutal honesty destabilizing every exchange. There is a reason that every human culture in the historical record draws distinctions between different kinds of lying. Between the lie that harms and the lie that protects. Between the deception of an enemy and the white lie told to spare a friend's feelings. Between fraud and tact. These distinctions are not modern moral innovations. They are ancient. They are cross-cultural. They appear everywhere humans appear, which strongly suggests they reflect something real about how lying actually functions in human social life, rather than just how we would like it to function. The lying that holds societies together has its own deep history. Diplomatic deception, strategic omission, the management of information across group hierarchies. Every human political system in recorded history involves the management of information, the careful control of what is revealed to whom and when. Every negotiation involves it. Every alliance involves it. Every court, every council, every parliament is in part a theater of managed truth. There is a darker version of this same story, and it would be dishonest, which would be appropriate given the topic, to skip it. Because the social function of deception has also historically been used to justify and maintain systems of oppression. The lies told by the powerful to the powerless. The fictions maintained by institutions. The propaganda of states. These are also part of the human deception story, and they are not small lies told to protect feelings. They are large, deliberate, carefully constructed false realities maintained by people who understood exactly what they were doing. The capacity that helps a parent protect a child's feelings, that helps a diplomat prevent a war, that helps a person navigate a difficult social situation with grace, is the same capacity that gets weaponized at scale by people with power and the willingness to use it. There is no version of the deception story that gets to be purely comfortable. The same cognitive tool. Vastly different uses. And here is where we arrive at the central paradox that every human culture has had to grapple with since the beginning of recorded history. We need deception to function socially, and we build elaborate moral and legal systems to suppress and punish it. Both of these things are simultaneously true. Every human society prohibits lying in its formal codes while engaging in constant informal deception at every level. The prohibition and the behavior coexist. They always have. They probably always will. Because the alternative, radical transparency, total honesty in every social exchange, is not actually a functional social system. It is a thought experiment that sounds appealing in the abstract and would be catastrophic in practice. Not because honesty is bad, but because human social life involves an enormous amount of information that, delivered without filter, would destroy more relationships than it preserved. We are not built for total transparency. We are built for managed truth, for the careful, socially sensitive navigation of what to share, what to withhold, what to soften, and what to amplify. That navigation is not deception in the predatory sense, but it is not pure honesty either. It is something more complicated than either. It is the actual texture of human social life, and it has been since the beginning. So when did ancient humans first start lying? The honest answer, and there is some irony in that phrasing, is that we do not know precisely. The cognitive architecture for intentional deception was almost certainly in place by the time anatomically modern humans appeared, 300,000 years ago. The social brain hypothesis suggests the selection pressure driving that architecture was operating for millions of years before that. The prefrontal expansion that supports it was a 2-million-year project. But the specific moment, the first time one human looked at another and consciously constructed a false belief in their mind, that moment left no fossil. It left no artifact. It was a thought, a choice, a flicker of social calculation in a brain that had finally become capable of it. And by the time anyone thought to ask when it started, it had been happening for so long and so constantly and so automatically that it was simply part of what it meant to be human. What we do know is this: you are extraordinarily good at lying. Not because you are a bad person, but because you are the product of hundreds of thousands of years of social evolution in an environment that rewarded the ability to manage information, model other minds, and navigate the space between what is true and what is useful to say. Your brain performs this operation constantly, fluently, and largely invisibly to you. It always has. It always will. The lie you told today is ancient. It is the same act, running on the same cognitive hardware, serving the same social functions that your ancestors performed around fires in the dark in a world that would be completely unrecognizable to you. What connects you to them, across all that distance, across all that change, is not just fire or smoke or clothing. It is the fact that when someone asked how you were doing this morning, you said fine. And you both moved on. So I have to ask, what's the last lie you told that you still think was the right call? Let me know in the comments. And if this video made you think about something you hadn't considered before, you know what to do.